One of the things that I'm having a problem with on my layout is that I'm modeling 2 paper mills, and with 2 paper mills, there are more darn chemicals that go in and out of a paper mill than you'd believe. In fact, there are about half a dozen on the input and probably 3 or 4 on the output that they deal with. And finding structures for a big paper mill, it's not easy unless you want to spend a lot of money buying tanks. So what I came up with is I've worked with PVC pipe before to create tanks, and what these will eventually hold is these will handle either dry kaolin, or they'll handle limestone slurry. And these are about the size that the tanks that they have, the ones I've seen up to Berlin and other places. These are cut 40 foot high. I use a radial arm saw to cut these things. If you set a stop on the thing, you can zap out 4, half a dozen, or whatever. The other thing that's going into this mill is there will be sulfur dioxide, sulfur dioxide, I believe it is, that goes in to bleach, one of the bleaching agents, and chlorine. And
No more chlorine.
what?
No more chlorine.
I'm stuck in 1980, so I have chlorine. Now, chlorine, they don't put it in tanks like that. Normally what they do is they have tanks that are horizontally mounted, and either they group them in rows like this, or they stack them in racks like that. And there are other chemicals, some of which go in small tanks like this, and some of them get horizontal, but you can see what you can do with the PVC pipe. Now, as far as cutting the ends on this, you have the option of going to somebody like Plastruct makes either helical ends, or they make hemisphere ends, or whatever you want, and all you have to do is find the right piece of PVC. It might not be a thick wall like this, it may be a thin wall. I've made propane tanks out of the thin wall PVC that you use for like sink waste and stuff like that. I don't know if they make any this size. I think they do make a 1-inch one, but I'm not sure that they make one that big, so you've got to kind of size them. If you don't want to do that, you can cut your own ends. One of the things, if you're dealing with a real small section like this in end scale, is you can get punches, and you can get thin 30 thousandths, I think this is, styrene, and you can punch out a round and glue it on the end and then file the shape. The other option, if you're dealing with these sizes, is to take a drafting tool. I happen to spend a few semesters in college as a civil engineering major and had to buy a drafting tool set. And if you use the metal ends, you get a center punch here, and then you get a scribe on this end. And if you take that and stick the thing in there to whatever radius you need and swivel it around, you can cut the ends and have a flat end, and then file it and paint it. These things can be silver, gray, white, cream color, whatever you want. The one thing I will say on styrene cement, I have a variety here. Plastruct has theirs, which works fairly fast. If you get Testas, it works a little bit slower. If you want to do spot welding, you can get Ambroid Pro Weld. And if you really want some time to work with it, you can go to the hardware store and buy the stuff that they use to actually put the stuff together. And this stuff, believe it or not, if you're laminating sheets together or something like that, you're far better off with this because it cures so much slower than you are with any one of these three cements. Now, when you get the tanks done, you know, they're not going to look like Walther's models. Now, the solution to that is Central Valley offers ladder parts and fences and stuff like that, and there also happens to be in the fence kit ladders that go on stairs. So you go with a combination of those, the stair kit, and the ladders that you steal off of this. There are ladders in here. If I can find one that's got the ladder still in it. Apparently I didn't bring one. Oh yes, there is one here with a ladder. There are ladders that you can take and glue onto the sides of these things to make the access ladders. The other source is Walters makes some piping kits, and these basically are off of their refinery set, and you can detail these things up in pretty good shape so that you can come up with some believable models of chemical tanks or whatever you want to make out of it. As far as a research source, back in the 1960s, Model Railroader put out a two-part article by a guy named Al Armitage called Case for Styrene. The best source since that time is this publication, which is put out by Evergreen. So if anybody's thinking about modeling tanks or adding to a refinery or something like that, I'd highly recommend looking at the PVC. If you want to do a welded tank or a riveted tank, you can take a knife, number 11 blade, and scribe the plates in these things so you don't end up with just a pure welded tank. You can do a plate tank that's earlier style than these are. Now, I thought that I would like to have a digester tank for my paper mill, which this is not PVC pipe. If you look inside, this is the center out of a wire cable reel. And what I did to it to get my digester tank was I had some 30,000 styrene that I bought by the pound in Portland when the supply store down there went, before they went out of business. And I wrapped it around, glued it on crazy glue on one side, standing on edge, and then wrapped it around real tight, put a bead of crazy glue on it, held it together, and that seam will go against the building or wherever it can't be seen. After I did that, I capped it with the same material, glued it on after I'd drawn around it and cut it, and then went around it with a mill file. I use a big mill file. You know, there's no need to fool around with little needle files and stuff like that when you're doing something like this. Now, I wanted some kaolin tanks for my HO layout, so using the same ones, the same tanks as the digester tanks, I took and I made a 40,000 styrene base that I painted concrete color. I made these up, put the ladder details from Central Valley on it, the walkways, the handrails on those are Central Valley. There's some Walters pipe detail. These things, the hatches, the manway hatches on the side and on the top where they get in to clean the tank, what I did for the first one was I used a paper punch on 40,000 styrene, and you can cut 40,000 styrene circles rather nicely with a paper punch. The larger ones, I have some of the punches, hole punches, and I chopped those out, but then I had to file all around the edges because they don't cut as clean as paper cutter does. But anyway, that's the kaolin tanks. And then I decided that one of the things that's going out by rail in tank cars for my paper mill is black liquor, which is the leftovers, the nasty stuff that's left over from a chlorine bleaching and caustic soda plant. And here in Maine, Merrill Transportation made a lot of money trucking it out of the paper mills to wherever it went to be recycled. And I figured that I want all my traffic covered, captured by the rail, so that's what I did. I'm going to have these tanks, and then they'll be loaded into cars. The vent caps on it are leftovers from, I believe, a AccuRail covered hopper. And the ladder again is Central Valley and some Walters piping. Now I have one paper mill that is coal-fired. I have another one that's oil-fired. And using much the same thing, but this time with 3.5-inch PVC, which I didn't have cut the last time. I made 2 oil tanks, and I put caution flammable on them and little decals left over from the Walters piping set. So right now I'm up to 3 tank car industries. Now I have a lot of, being the chlorine caustic soda plants, I have a lot of chlorine going into the plant. So the bigger mill gets a bigger chlorine tank set. The smaller mill gets a smaller chlorine tank set. I don't know if the mills have the tanks exposed like that, but I have seen chlorine industrial applications stored like that, and normally they have them, you know, it's believable. Now, I don't know how they store caustic soda, but taking some of these, there's one of my caustic soda storage facilities. So with what I had here and the addition here, I ended up with 6 HO tank cast spotting locations and probably at least 1 or 2 for the N-gauge layout. And I have my digester tank for my mill. So that's it. Those are kaolin tanks. They're made out of PVC pipe with plastic details that are available from a variety of sources. Central Valley makes the lattice stock, and some of the details on the top are just pieces of plastic pipe and other things. These are chlorine tanks and caustic soda tanks, and they again are made with PVC pipe. The uprights are Plastruct I-beams, and brass pipe is used to connect the different tanks. In the background here we have some black liquor tanks, and again these are the PVC pipe. You can see that there are some pieces of plastic tubing and stuff that have been put up there for the input pipes, and again the ladders from Central Valley, and the handrails on the walkways are also from Central Valley. That vertical tank there is the digester tank. It was made by taking a cardboard tube and wrapping it with styrene plastic, and then the house was built on top. These things are actually pressure vessels, and they have elliptical or cylindrical ends, so that there's usually a house built over the top and the bottom is skirted so you don't see the elliptical ends. Here we have more chlorine tanks, and in the background there, they're fuel oil tanks, because this particular paper mill is fueled by fuel oil. And in the background there, what you saw was a bunch of Revell engine houses, Superior bakeries, and things like that that have been kit bashed together to create a false front building for one part of the mill. This mill receives dry kaolin, so in the foreground there, what you saw is the hoppers for the dry kaolin. They're a combination of using an old International Hobbies kit that had the hoppers on it, and then modifying and putting the house on and building the conveyor system. Eastern Magnesia Talc ships out ground talc rock in covered hoppers, and these are the bins where it's collected and loaded into the hoppers. This was built again with PVC pipe, Plastruct or evergreen members. The top of it, the catwalk and the railing protection, was done with styrene stock. This is an older structure. Prior to building with styrene, we used to have to take mailing tubes and stuff like that and wrap it with paper. The building itself is wood. It's a grain feed mill, grain dealer type of arrangement, and it's building probably built at the beginning of the 20th century. This is a propane tank. It was built using a piece of PVC sink drain, and the saddles that it sits on and the ends are from Plastruct. Caledonia Sand and Gravel is another part of the International Hobbies kit that I salvaged, and the plastic tubing adds the feed system. The little box up on top is actually a refrigerator unit off of an Athearn 40-foot trailer. This was a Walthers cement plant, which was cut in half lengthwise and to make a double width building, and it is a grain company. There's not a lot of scratch building here, mostly kit bashing. This is a older, probably 1960s, 1970s vintage brass tank, oil tanks that were imported a long time ago. This is a cobbled together semi-scratch built water tank that uses the Central Valley beams for the legs, hemispheres from Plastruct to make a water tank, and the top is a wrapping of thin styrene. This is a Walthers fuel dealer that the tanks were modified. The base was changed to build the enclosures that are required these days for spill protection.
My clinic tonight is kind of a little unusual thing. You've seen my engines with lights in them in the past. I've had that as a clinic. Well, I had one of these big long engines. I'm sure you've all seen them. The gold engine with Golden Eagle printed on the side of it. And it's a great big long engine with 6-wheel trucks on them and so forth. And usually layouts like this, the engine is way too big. Well, I had 2 or 3 of them kicking around the house. So one day I decided to take one of those engines and I cut it up. And I didn't bring the other one with me because I can't find it. But I cut it right about here. I took a piece out of it, probably about that wide. And then I glued the 2 halves back together again. And I got it so that I still left the 6-wheel trucks on it and the fuel tanks, as you can see, in between. And I also put, see, the engine, I discombobulated the engine. It was in one set of 6-wheel trucks. But the light I left in it, because I like lights. So what I did with this is I was able to put it on a siding with the light on it. Move it just slightly every once in a while. And now you've got an engine on a powered track that could be on a siding, and with a couple of cars hooked on the back end to show that that engine could be working on that siding. It's not on the main line. Your engine, the motor itself isn't drawing any power, and it's kind of a little bit more realistic than just an engine sitting there with nothing indicating that it's there for a purpose. So this is what I did with that great big long engine, is that I went and I shortened it up. And I use it on my home layout, as well as I've used it at on my modules at some of the shows. This is the engine that won the club colors. So what I did, with Paul's permission, I unhooked the engine. The engine is still in there. All I did was take the wire off it. And then I took an LED, a bright LED, because you know I like lights. So I hooked the thing up in there. Pardon?
You like bright.
I like bright lights. It's more realistic going down the track with a bright light than a dim light. This one here, I also put a rectifier in it so that regardless of the polarity, the light will stay on. Whereas this one here, if you change the direction, out it goes.
Yep.
So that's the difference between this one and this one. With the bridge rectifier, it doesn't make any difference which way the polarity is. And this one here, the LED is, I have to look at it, the LED is right up front, so that it is shining right on the 2 little plastic pieces that did come with the engine. Someday I want to, and it does light up the number board a little bit too. Someday I want to try and with one of these units and light up the number boards with the one light in here, maybe with the optic fibers.
That'd be
But that's another clinic down the road.
Okay, I'm going to try and explain. We haven't had a session on couplers for a while, so here we go. One of the first things you do is you take like Athearn car, you put ticket and everything else, and you have what we usually call our horn hook couplers that come with these standard, and that's the old style couplers. Now we have what we call KD couplers, which are more prototypical, and what we do is a lot of us convert these over and the horn hook over to the KD style. The easiest thing to do is to get something like this here, a piece of wood, put a couple sections of tracks, and then you can get these coupler height gauges from Kadee. I forget what the number of them is that they go by, but you put your couplers on, and you can measure and see that your couplers on the cars measure up to the height gauge, and that gives you your clearance. Now some of these pins, this pin here, can be high or low. Now Kadee sells couplers, and I had my son make a diagram on the 3 different styles of couplers that they have. They have the center shank, which is what the normal number 5 coupler is, and then they have an upper shank and a lower shank, and that lifts or lowers the coupler itself. Now sometimes, I forgot, there's a little pin like this here, and it has a round edge and a concave edge here, and you can take your pin sometimes, if you can't get correct height, that you can either bend your pin up a little bit so that it will clear your switches and your rails, or do it the other way around. You can also drop it down, and these are metal pins, and all you have to do is just be careful about doing that. Also, Kadee has what we call these little washers. They're 2 different colors. One is 010 thickness, and the other one is an 015 thickness. Now usually if you only have center shanks, you unscrew the truck and you put these washers in here, depending on how high you have to lift the box from the truck. Then you screw the truck back in, put it on here, and measure it up, and it should get as even as possible. An Athearn car usually has a metal cover over here, and you just spring them off or spring them on. You can take a screwdriver and you can pry this off if you want to replace this. This is an AccuRail box car, and they have a little plastic cover instead of a metal cover, and you have to push this down. And this one here is, I believe, is an AccuRail also. It's a different type of cover. Now some covers come with a little hole in it, and you have a screw. Intermountain. They have a hole, and you have a 256 screw that you can screw the coupler box on, and that way there you won't lose your coupler box. Kadee's system is they have a little box, which is this shape here, if you can get that on. And what you would do is they have this little brass spring type device that you insert in here. You take your coupler, put that in there, and then you can put your cover on, and then you can either 2 ways of mounting this. I have an engine here that I bought from Terry last Saturday. He was charging $10 for it, but somehow he was persuaded that he should let it go for $5. So it's got a coupler. His sales were very good that day. I think he felt very generous to me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this off here, and then what I'll do is take this box and I will glue it. I'll use some super glue here, this CA glue, glue the box onto here, and then I can take my regular glue, put this whole combination together, and then glue this on here. Now the thing is, before I do that, I just want to lightly glue it on here, put my engine on here, and see how high or how low this coupler is, and then I can adjust the height of I'll have to put some backing if I have to lower the coupler or not to match to the coupler gauge. So that's going to be my little project. There are some other types of couplers. You've got McHenry coupler, which has 2 little built-in springs instead of using the brass spring setup that Kadee has.
Kadee has those now.
And now Kadee has come out and they call it a whisker coupler, so which is very similar to the McHenry. The big difference between the Kadee and the McHenry is that this shaft here The Katy is all metal, McHenry is a plastic. So this is much stronger. If you're going to be pulling 20, 30, or 40 cars, if your consist can pull that many, you're better off with the Katy couplers, because they won't pull apart like the real ones do. You can buy the number 5 couplers in 2 pairs in a package like this, or you can buy 25 pairs in a pack like this. Also, what I do is I have this little film canister, and I put a whole bunch of all my Katy couplers in here. Now, the spring that's in here allows your coupler to go back and forth for your opening and closing the couplers when you're hooking and unhooking cars. One of the things in order to make it work comfortably is to put a little bit of what we call grease that Katy has, and you just spray just a little bit inside here and make sure the mechanism will work. Now, how this works is that they sell this magnet here for uncoupling cars. You just lay this in the track like this, nail it down, glue it down, or whatnot. You take the car, and it'll open it up, and that'll unhook. And then, if you're running over it, it doesn't disengage at all. But when you stop, it opens up, and you just pull away, or you can back the car up to wherever you want, and the coupler stays open. These couplers have springs in here in order for the mechanism to work. Sometimes these springs will pop out. You can't find them. In these packages, usually you'll find some extra springs. Now, it's kind of hard. I found at first it was very hard to put these springs in here. What I found is that you can take your X-Acto knife blade, put the spring in on one hook in here, and then just take the edge and squeeze it a little bit, and you can maneuver it into the other one, and it's slick as to how it gets on there, and which is a lot easier. I think that's a quick and dirty way of explaining couplers. Any questions?
Thank you for watching this episode of Train Time.